Hello, my name is Parker Otto, and for my project, I'm going to be examining the land use possibilities for a freeway cap over the Dan Ryan Expressway here in Chicago. For this project, I've constructed a digital model of the area directly surrounding the Dan Ryan Expressway from 57th Street all the way up to 47th Street. With this model, I have gone about 2 to 3 blocks east and west of the expressway, and I will be examining 3 different land use scenarios and talking about the different benefits that it would have for the community at large, as well as some of the drawbacks. And I'll be ending with what I believe would be the perfect solution for knitting back a community that was divided by this expressway. So the way that I have organized this, I have recorded a cinematic featuring 4 different sections. The first section is sort of the familiar, which is what we have now with the Dan Ryan, being a sunken expressway with a rapid transit rail line down the middle. Following that, I will talk about one of the uses that could be possible, which is a green space adaptation. Following that, I will be talking about a educational or more monolithic approach to the land use. And I will end with a multifaceted neighborhood, which will consist of places for people to live, work, play, etc. So let's dive on in. All right, welcome to the familiar. As you can see here, I have a recreation of Garfield Boulevard and the Garfield Red Line station. If we can just pause right here, you can see that there are a few upgrades I couldn't resist, even with the familiar. I am a very frequent rider of the 55 bus, so I just had to include some bus lanes here just to improve service. But as you can see, the neighborhood around this area of the expressway is very desolate, I'd say. It has some car-oriented infrastructure, these gas stations here. I believe this one, I know for a fact, is there. But I've taken some creative liberties with the representation of these areas. You can see here along Wells Street, there is, your typical row house aesthetic going on. So that's a lot of multifamily housing. Of course, that existed long before this expressway plowed through the area in the 70s. And today you would probably see lots more urban prairie where a lot of these houses used to be. For the ease of recreating this area, I had just filled in the entire thing, but the urban prairie that you would see is really testament to the way that this neighborhood has declined due to the lack of food, lack of amenities, and car-centric planning that's gone on with this huge expressway. And despite being so close to a rapid transit station, it's still a very unfriendly place for a person to be. Say you live right here in one of these houses toward the top of the screen, and you want to get downtown, you have to walk along this really loud expressway and sort of crisscross your way through intersections they're very wide and high speed. If you've ever been to the Dan Ryan at the Garfield stop or any stop, as a matter of fact, you know that cars do not stop for pedestrians. They are very adamant about going highway speeds on these boulevard roads. And I think that has a lot to do with the design of the road in general. Studies show that vehicle speed is not really determined based on speed limit. It's determined based on the design of the road itself. So wider lanes are going to lead to higher speeds, less obstacles in the road, like less planters or curbs, or even speed bumps. That's going to cause increases in speeds. So that's, I think, one of the big failures of the boulevard system at this area is that it encourages high speed driving and it really discourages walkability. So that if you were wanting to get from this business here across the boulevard all the way to this business over here, it's going to be quite the trek. You're going to have to dodge cars going 55, 60 miles per hour in some cases. So that is part of what this freeway cap is supposed to rectify. So continuing on here, you can see more of the familiar. Of course, it's a very low trafficy day, but that is mostly due to the limitations of the simulation. So as we turn to the right here, we're going to see the beginning of this freeway cap, as well as the red line train pulling into the station there. So pausing here, you can see that there is no sacrifice here for these drivers. This is going to maintain all of the access that they had before. It's going to maintain every single on and off ramp, as you can see here. And overall, it's just going to be a positive impact for all parties involved, regardless of what somebody's opinion might be on automobile transit in the first place. This is more of a compromise rather than the full, we want a highway here or we don't want a highway here. This is kind of the best of both worlds in a way. So here we can also see the sort of beginnings of my first topic of approach, and that's going to be urban green space. So I'm taking a lot of inspiration here from my hometown of St. Louis, where there is a highway cap over Highway 55 in downtown St. Louis, which leads from the old courthouse to the Gateway Arch. And that freeway cap has become a place where this urban green space has been introduced into a city that is not exactly famous for having a lot of urban green space, especially downtown, apart from Forest Park. And so this area here is kind of reminiscent of that idea. So you can see here, I've got the gray stones along with, your typical 2 flat houses and some bungalows. And that is being knitted together with the other side of the freeway right here. So it's being knitted together by this urban park. So as you can see, there's going to be a lot of green space, lots of trees. And then I'm going to pause right here because currently there really isn't anything right here along this road here. Right now, it is mostly industrial use. That is going to be, freight traffic. It's going to be, I believe Metra owns most of this, and they use it as a service yard for their train sets. And what I've done is I've taken just like a little half block sliver of that industrial use, which right now is mostly parking lot, I believe, or gravel. And I've turned that into some mass-produced housing. And that's why you see these repeated patterns here. While I do believe that they can be soulless, to say the least, it is kind of a double-edged sword in that, yes, it is soulless, but it is more economically viable from a building perspective. It's easier to get things done whenever you're doing them in mass like this. And whenever you want to build housing in a city with such a large housing shortage, I think that building these repeated patterns is one of the easiest ways to get it done. And what you can see here is that I've also taken a lane off of the one-way road that was here. So this was a 3-lane road, it still is in real life, and I've added this protected bike lane along with planters and trees. So what these planters do, and what I've touched on in the past, is they slow down car traffic because these lanes here are very narrow. Notice how there's no parking and there's not a lot of room for these cars to maneuver. So that's going to keep them slowed down. And it's going to protect the cyclists that are going to be on the other side here. And this bike lane too is going to be really nice for access for people that are living in these newly constructed homes, which would almost certainly be affordable housing or a mix of affordable housing and market price housing. So continuing on here, you can sort of see here the town square or park square that I've included in here, as well as some playgrounds and a gazebo. So this is going to be a manicured city park, but not too manicured. The idea is to take inspiration from Central Park in New York and bring dense trees and forestation to the city of Chicago. And that is what I was trying to achieve with this green space. Of course, it would be really easy and really cost effective to not build anything and just continue this green space all the way up the Dan Ryan. And some people might argue that that's actually beneficial because all of those trees and plants, they're going to soak up the CO2 emitted by these cars that are running under the freeway cap. However, I think that would be a poor use of the land because you're dealing with a housing shortage right now. You're dealing with a neighborhood that has seen better days due to this freeway. And urban green space is great, but it's not going to do much to revitalize the area directly surrounding it. And while I do think that there should be parks on this freeway cap, I don't think that it should encompass the entirety of the cap. And then moving on here, we have what I'm calling the monolithic approach to a freeway cap. So this is the edge of the freeway right here. This is the current edge. So this is going to be Wells Street. This housing would have already been here, or very similar styles of housing, 2 flats, 3 flats, gray stones, apartments, you know, that sort of typical middle housing. And then what I've done here is I have made a place that is built up but not inviting. So that's the sort of monolithic aspect of this type of land use. So the way that this was imagined was that, say, UIC, DePaul, or Loyola, like a big university, came into this area with this newly developed land and has made a campus of sorts. You can see similar things happening right now with the 78, which is being built on a rail yard that is directly south of Roosevelt Street, and I believe west of Wells Street, or Roosevelt Road, rather. UIC is going to be building a new campus-esque type thing there. And so this is kind of reminiscent of those plans. So what you're going to see here are lots of monolithic housing, which is very large. You're going to see, this would primarily be for students, of course. You're going to see large buildings that have very, very loud statements. You're going to see parking structures, I forgot to mention over there, for the car-centric nature of this monolithic design. You're going to see large streets, which is very common in Chicago, with not a lot of shade. So it sort of implies that this is a place to pass through. Say you're a student, you're just getting from class to class. You're not wanting to stay a while, sit on a bench. And I feel like that is really reminiscent of some areas of downtown Chicago where you have a lot of these planters, but no trees for shade. It's mostly just flowers. And that's what I tried to recreate here. And so what you're going to see as well is these large buildings, large student housing, large libraries and classrooms. That is very much a telltale sign of a university moving into this location. So you'll see things like dining halls. You'll see, you know, your typical like Starbucks and large businesses moving into this area, but that's not a very inviting place for the community that's over here that was already here. What's happening here is you're creating a divide. So while the freeway cap was meant to stitch this neighborhood back together, it's not actually doing that job, because what you're going to have here is you're going to have students who are quote unquote supposed to be here, and then you're going to have the other people who already lived here that are maybe going to be pushed out, that are going to be not welcome here in this square, whether that be by CPD or by campus security. And I think that's a model that's going to be really reminiscent of areas of Hyde Park. So the areas around campus, you can't really see people playing music in the streets or locals really walking around. It's been very claimed by the university community. Um, I know I had spoken to a professor about this whenever I first started school here, and he described it as a bubble of whiteness. And I think that's what this sort of monolithic approach to this land use would cause, is another bubble similar to Hyde Park. And that is not a great way to stitch a community back together, and not a wise use of this newly created land. So again, we're just going through here. You can see the Metro rail yard on this edge here. It was very difficult to recreate. All right, so moving here, we have what I would envision as the ideal approach to this freeway cap. And what that's going to be is a vibrant, colorful community. You can already see lots of these buildings are very, very colorful. I took a lot of inspiration from Chris Devon's art from the ride that we did with him. I wanted to put a lot of graffiti art, murals. I hand place a lot of these on the sides of these buildings, so we'll take a tour of that. You can see the same protected bike lanes along with shady sidewalks. Same thing here, you've got big trees in the center providing lots of shade for the pedestrians, and you've got large crosswalks to ensure that people get across safely. So you can see here lots and lots of street art, bike lanes that are being frequently used, and you've got just a colorful approach to modern housing. And that, I think, is what we lack a lot of here, especially on the south side when you see these new developments in Woodlawn and parts of Englewood too, is that you have these new housing units that they're beautiful, of course, and they're very stocked with amenities that people need to live a modern lifestyle, but you have them made of these gray cinder blocks and black siding. It's depressing, and it's not ideal for placemaking. So my idea here and my inspiration, again, was from Chris Devons, and that was to make this a place where people want to be. This is a place where people live. This is a place where people work. This is a place where people play. This is all mixed use development where you have businesses on the bottom, residences on top, you have offices, you have plazas, you have all sorts of things that you would need, gyms, restaurants, everything that you would need for a successful neighborhood. And you have color, you have art, you have, this is the sort of place where people would be playing the saxophone on the street with their case open for donations. This is one of those places where people are going to want to be. They're going to want to walk around. They're going to want to stay for a while. They're going to want to spend their money. This is a place where everybody from around the South Side is going to be able to go. And another thing that I took inspiration from for this place, you can't really see in the built environment here, but it would be social policies. And I'm calling that the Boxville model. Upon visiting Boxville, I was really, really surprised to learn that these were sort of subsidized businesses in a way. Like the businesses in Boxville are being allowed to operate at a lower cost than what would normally be required of them. So they have lower startup costs, as was mentioned on their website. And that really allows local entrepreneurs to thrive in this environment. So when I was building this area, I would imagine that similar practices would be in place. So it would be subsidized businesses, subsidized housing. You would have people who can afford to be here. You can have artists who normally wouldn't be able to afford areas like this that are actually able to live in nice places. You would have lots and lots of local business owners that are finally able to pursue their dreams and see real upward mobility. And I think that's the real key word when you're looking at a diverse community like this, and a community that's meant to be a community, not just residential, not just an office park, not just a commercial corridor, but a place where you have everything that you need. You have food, you have restaurants, you have entertainment, you have concerts. And that's sort of the spirit of a community. And the other thing is that you want to draw people at all times to these areas. You want people to come for concerts at night. You want people to come for dining during the day. You want people to come because they work here. And then you want people to ultimately live here and shop here and walk around and enjoy their time and really get this experience that many people don't have whenever you're living in a place that's strictly residential or a place that's strictly busy. You want a sort of in between, which is what I was trying to embody when making this area of the freeway cap. So that is all I have for cinematics, and that was my sort of rant on urban space and land use. Ultimately, I do regret not having enough time to really go more in depth in this area. As you can see in the background here, I have the assets for the Robert Taylor homes, and I really wanted to incorporate that into this area, but with the limited time, I was not really able to fit that into the scope of this investigation and this report. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed this sort of monologue and this view of what could possibly happen if the political will and economic will were to allow for a freeway cap to be built over the Dan Ryan.